This to Tara and Chris, this is really phenomenal to me. And Gray, you announced you announced all the people that were on my list and more. And Gray, so now Tara, I think I'm going to get in trouble, but I just was a former mayor, so I just want to say to Mayor Joyce Craig, it's good to see you here. I just want to give a love to my fellow mayor, because once a mayor, always a mayor. And then this is a person that blew me away in my last times up here, trying to help her become the governor of this state. She's an incredible activist, leader, and courageous person. Molly Kelly, I just want to give you my love as well. All right, so this is incredible. I am blown away. And just for folks who are here who can't see me right now, I do want to say to you, I am not leaving quickly. I will stay here and take every selfie that you want. And when we do the Q&A, if you're not in my eyesight and I don't call on you, I'm willing to answer questions afterwards. But I do want to say this. This is what gives me faith. Not in my candidacy or that you're here for me. It gives me faith in us and who we are. We share this common history. We have had ugliness in our past. We have had hate in our past. Entire political parties, like the Know-Nothings, rose up in this country's history with bigotry at their core, anti-immigration at their core. We are not a great nation because we were bereft of these things. We are a great nation that in the face of these things, we responded with more unity. We responded with more grace. We responded with a firm commitment to the ideals of this country, liberty, justice for all. And when people start to doubt who we are, start to lose faith in us, start to feel as if the forces tearing us apart are stronger than those holding us together, then we have a crisis in our country. I worry that we are now indulging in a politics that's pitting us against each other. It's putting one American against another, or that politicians think they can ascend by demeaning and degrading some Americans in order to try to capture higher offices in our land. I'm running for president because I do not believe these things. I'm running for president because I have a great faith that the history of this nation is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible when we come together and work together and stand together, not despite our differences, but because we know that when we bring different people together from all corners of the planet Earth with common commitment and common cause, there's nothing we can't achieve. And so this is a moral moment for me. And it's much bigger than an office. Y'all, it is a dissatisfaction we should all have that we live in a nation where children across this country in red states and blue states, Republican children, Democratic children, often find it easier to find unleaded gasoline than unleaded water. That we live in a nation that folk who are being churned into our criminal justice system, a system that teaches you better, as Brian Stevenson says, if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. That we have folks in this country, senior citizens from all backgrounds, who wallow below the poverty line, struggling for human dignity that they deserve. We have a nation right now that people are putting aside their life-saving drugs or their medical care because they can't afford it. These problems are not bigger than us. We can deal with them, but we've got to get back to recognizing that we have a common pain and we've got to refocus on that sense of common purpose. And so this campaign can't be about just one office. It has to be about all of us, because every issue I just talked about was going on before Donald Trump was elected. Think about that for a second. Everything I just talked about was going on before Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. I'm not saying that what he's doing isn't moral vandalism, that he's not hurting people, that his policies from the EPA to the Department of Education are hurting Americans. But if we as Democrats especially make it about him and not about us, and make it about one office and not the cause of our country, we're making a very big mistake. We can't define ourselves by what we're against as a nation. We have to define ourselves with a bigger vision about what we're for. And the activism activism and the engagement that we've seen over the last 2 years can't cease when one person leaves office. Or then so many of the issues that are plaguing our democracy will not be addressed because it needs more democracy, more engagement. The opposite of justice is not always injustice, it's most often apathy, indifference, and inaction. And so I'm running this campaign not just because of the quality of my ideas or the policies that I want to push. Those are really important, and I hope in the Q&A we get to a lot of those. But understand this, if you're leaving here, please understand the spirit and the energy that I'm trying to push in this campaign is a call for a revival of civic grace, a more courageous empathy in our country, for more of us to act and engage in the cause of our country, which is to fight injustice, to establish more fairness, to create a country that works and elevates humanity in a way that we become even more of a light unto other nations. But let me make this very personal. And when I say personal, it's not just me and my story. Everybody here in this overly full house. I hope the mayor understands that we're not breaking any fire codes, really. There are exits marked to the left and the right. But I want to tell you, be very personal with you, because I think all of us understand that this is the story of how we all got here. When I was growing up, my parents never let me forget how I got the blessings that I get. It wasn't just because of their personal actions and their grit and their self-reliance. They let me understand that the blessings that I had were paid for well before I was born by the sacrifices and struggles. But this is how they basically told the story, because when I was a baby in 1969, just born, and my parents were looking for housing in northern New Jersey, in some of the best areas with the best public schools. They were trying to find homes, but every time they would show up at the house, the real estate agent would see this black family and tell them, "Oh, I'm so sorry, this house has been pulled off the market," or "I'm so sorry, this house has been sold." And my parents felt they were being discriminated against, so they went to this great group of people who looked a lot like the folks in this house, and they said, "I'm sorry, this is our America. This is not who we are. We're not going to sit on the sidelines of history. We're going to do something to make a more perfect union." And they said, "We're going to help you." So they rallied together to help my family buy a home, and this is what they did. They joined with some lawyers and set up a sting operation, and when my parents would go to a house and be told it was sold already or pulled off the market, they would leave and a white couple would come along, posing as home buyers, and find that the house was still for sale on the house that I grew up in. My parents went to go look at the home. They were told it was sold. They left, and the white couple came, found out the house was still for sale. They put a bid on the house. The bid was accepted. Papers were drawn up. A closing was set. And on the day of the closing, the real estate agent's office, the white couple did not show up. My father did. And a volunteer lawyer, this great man who happened to be white, walked in with my dad, and we imagined that he prepared the whole night for this great moment. That he probably rehearsed his speech in violation of federal foul housing law and the values of America, but he didn't get a chance to give his speech. Because as soon as the real estate agent realized he was caught, he didn't give up. He stood up and punched my dad's lawyer in the face. And then he sicked a dog on my dad. And let me tell you right now, every time my dad would tell this story as I was growing up, the dog would get bigger. Eventually it was, boy, I had to fight a pack of wolves to get to his house. And imagine this. I'm an 18-year-old elected to be president of my class in high school, all-American football player in high school, on my way to Stanford. So yes, I got into Stanford because of a 4.0, 1,600, 4.0 yards per carry, 1,600 receiving yards. My dad would look at me and say, "Boy, don't you dare ever walk around this house like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. Yeah, go out there to college, but remember, you're going to rack up degrees. You'll have more degrees in the month of July, but you're not hot. Because life ain't about the degrees you get. It's about the service that you give. You owe a debt. This very home you're living in, you owe a debt. Not to the who was president or who was a senator. You owe a debt to ordinary Americans who made an extraordinary commitment on the cause of this country. And you can't pay it back. You got to pay it forward. And so I decided with my life, I'd start as a housing advocate for people who did not have housing rights being honored. And I moved into one of the toughest neighborhoods in our country where people said you couldn't solve these problems. Places people told you to stay away from, don't walk there. But no, we're Americans. We take on the toughest problems. And I went to the Central Ward of Newark, and I joined together with other people. People of dignity, people of grace, people of beauty. And we started working together. We took on the slumlord and the projects I moved into. Got convicted in federal court. They got me into politics. And I ran for office to lead a city that was in crisis. 60 years of losing population, losing investment, schools failing the genius of our children. And people told me what we couldn't do. But we are Americans. There's nothing we can't do. And I joined together with folks who were different than me, folks who were even in different parties than I was, calling to the conscience of our community. If we stand together and work together, we'll transform this city. And guess what? We did. Newark, sailing through the worst economy of my lifetime, and we were able to create the biggest economic development period in our city's 60 years in our city. Take our schools from failing to now the #1 school system in America for beat the odds schools, high poverty, high performance. Our first youth courts and drug courts and veterans courts in our state. We opened up entire city blocks to urban farming, got supermarkets in the neighborhoods to banish food deserts, created tremendous change. But it's not the story of a leader, it's a story of a people. I believe there's nothing we can't do, and I went to Washington to try to combat cynicism about even Washington. As Craig said generously in his introduction, we took on problems, again, that people weren't talking about enough, people said couldn't be solved, like the criminal justice system, which is a cancer on the soul of this country. Any nation that professes like we do to be the land of the free, but then incarcerates more people on the planet Earth than any other one, that's a hypocrisy. 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth is right here in America. And we were told we couldn't do anything with it. And then I get to the Senate, and makes matters worse is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley. I could write a dissertation on our disagreements. And he literally was standing on the floor arguing against my bill. And I could have gone on the floor and yelled at him and argued against him. But you know what? Mayor, you'll appreciate this. I ran a fire department. This idea of fighting fire with fire doesn't really work. It was said in my introduction. You can't fight a house fire. I learned this as mayor. By bringing more fire. He's right. The darkness can't drive out darkness. And I said to Chuck Grassley, let me come talk to you. Let me come talk about our values. How are we coming at this problem? And we created more understanding. If that's Chuck Grassley, let him in. Give the man a hug. We found common ground, and we started building from there. And we ended up building a bill that got out of our committee, that failed to get passed under Obama, but we didn't give up. We kept going. Now we passed that bill that is liberating thousands of Americans, one of whom I took to the State of the Union address, who was given a life sentence for crack cocaine weighing less than a baseball. I'm telling you right now, I am fired up. I believe in our country. I believe in us. Don't let anybody tell you it's impossible that every American can have access to quality health care. Don't let anybody tell you it's impossible that every child can find a school that's a cathedral of learning. Whether you're a beautiful child with a disability or whether you're a child in an inner city, everybody in America can have great schools. Don't tell me we can't have a nation in which every child has a birthright, has access to clean air and clean water. Don't tell me that we can't restore dignity to work. That everyone who's willing to work a full-time job can raise a family, can have a career path, can retire with dignity and security. Don't tell me what we can't do, because I know our history. We defeated Jim Crow and the Nazis. We found a way to go to the moon and map the human genome. We did these things not because of rugged individualism or self-reliance. I love those themes in our country. But the way we did those things was we did them together. American to American, reaching out across the lines that divide us because they're nowhere near as strong as the ties that bind us. And so I'm running for president not just to win an office, but there's a larger campaign for our country. Our nation is a moral moment. We are at a crossroads that is going to define who we are. We all have to accept the responsibilities that we are framers again. That we have to reestablish the ideals of this country in this generation. That this nation needs our civic grace. It needs our empathy. It needs our real definition of patriotism. Because what is patriotism? Love of country. And you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. I reject this idea that some people tell me, well, we're a nation of tolerance, as if that's some high achievement. Go home tonight and tell somebody you live with, I tolerate you. That's not a great statement. We wouldn't be here in America at this point if we just tolerated each other. We have worked always to create a more beloved community. That's why white folk in New Jersey reached out to my family and made us neighbors, because we believed in a more beloved community. That's why Alice Paul stood before the White House and was the first person ever arrested there, because she knew that you could not have a beloved community if you did not have everyone with equal rights. It's why Frederick Douglass's last event that he went to before he died wasn't an abolition event, it was a suffrage event, because he knew his freedom and liberty was tied up with that of women in this country. We got here because of us. And if this presidential candidate becomes about one person, if somebody comes in to campaign in this state and says, I alone can solve these problems, elect me and I'll make everything better, that's a lie. And if Democrats wait for some savior to come along, we are not recognizing what New Hampshire's already done. The blue tsunami that came through here, electing representatives, electing senators, electing local leaders. That's how you build a party, and that's how you save a country. By activating each and every one of us. I am not going to be one of these presidents who just tells you what I want to do for you. I'm going to demand more from you. Because I know the opposite of justice is not injustice, it's apathy and indifference and inaction. We need to awaken the understanding that King said so much more eloquently than me, that the problem today is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And that's what I want to end with. I want to end by talking to you about your power, and that this is one of those moments where we can awaken the beautiful, powerful energy of this nation once again. That in this election, not just in the White House office, but in Senate seats and House seats, in local legislatures in our states, that this can be an election that all folks step up and talk, because I know Americans care about these issues regardless of what your party label is. Heck, millennial Americans, if you're Republican or Democrat, you want common sense gun safety. Millennial Americans, whether you're Republican or Democrat, are tired of seeing people getting crushed by student debt. Millennial Americans, whether you're Republican or Democrat, believe that senior citizens should have dignity in their retirement, and believe that we need to do something about climate change. We have common values, folks, and have a lot of common pain. But we've got to get back to that common purpose, and that's how I want to end. There's a second half to that story I told you already, and it stunned me. You see, I go to the Senate and get to work, and I decide to write a book called United. And if you have a daddy like mine, when you're writing a book about your past, you got to fact check stuff. I mean, was it a pack of wolves or a dog? And so I find the head of the Fair Housing Council from the 1960s. She was easy to find. Her name's Ms. Lee Porter. She is 92 years old and still the head of the Fair Housing Council. And now she doesn't represent black families. She represents Muslim families and same-sex couples and Americans with disabilities, because she believes firmly that justice is justice and has no color, no orientation, no religion. There's one justice in America, and that's American justice. And I talked to her, and she said, go find the lawyer that organized it all, Cory. She can confirm all the stories, including the size of the dog. And so I find this guy, his name's Arthur Lessman. He's now a retired judge in New Jersey. Back then he was a young man just starting out. Anybody here who started a business can imagine how busy he was in the 1960s, starting a business, tired, working hard, trying to raise a family. And I listened to his story. I called him up. I'm Cory. I know who you are. I go, well, sir, I don't know what you do. If you know what you did for my family, I know what I did for your family. I'm like, sir, well, I want to thank you. And he gave me all the facts. He confirmed all the parts of the story. It was not a pack of wolves, for crying out loud. And then I asked him the question that floored me. I asked him why. Why would you, at a time that you were busy, the time that you were working hard, trying to start a business, at a time that there was fear about black people moving into neighborhoods and property values going down and white flight, why would you take so much time to help black families moving into your community? And this is what his answer was. He says, Cory, I remember the moment I made the decision. I go, the moment? He goes, I know exactly what I was doing. What were you doing? I was watching TV. And unlike me some nights, where I'm watching Rachel, and I get caught up in a state of sedentary agitation. She gets me so upset some nights. And sometimes I find myself saying to the TV, somebody should do something about that. And then I realize, you're a United States Senator. No, he wasn't like me in sedentary agitation. He was watching TV. And this is back, y'all, some people in this room remember, not everybody, when we had like 3 channels. And you all remember at 11 o'clock, they would like play the national anthem, and it'd be done, no more TV. It's probably why we had higher birth rates back then. My staff hates when I make that joke. He's watching TV and they have breaking news, something now every 10 seconds on CNN. Breaking news, Melania has a jacket. But this is rare, it rarely happened. But they broke away from the movie he was watching. What movie was he watching? A movie called Judgment at Nuremberg. Most of America is watching this show about the Holocaust and the aftermath. And the show gets cut into because the cameras go to a bridge in Alabama. You see, these marchers started marching from Selma, and we're trying to get to Montgomery. Why? Something we know about right now. So they could vote. Voters' rights. But they get stopped on that bridge, confronted by Alabama state troopers, and he's watching on a couch in New Jersey, and these state troopers confront them. The marchers decided to turn around. They were going to do a short prayer and turn around. How do I know that? Because I talked to one of those marchers, who's now one of my colleagues and friends, one of my heroes, a man named John Lewis. And Congressman Lewis, definitely brought her in. Congressman Lewis says he was about to get down on his knees to pray with his fellow marchers, 600 fellow Americans, but yet before they can even get onto their knees, they get gassed. And then the state troopers storm in with billy clubs, savagely beating the marchers. John Lewis humbly says to me, he goes, Cory, I shed a little bit of blood on that bridge. And I looked at him and said, Congressman Lewis, you had your head cracked open. You were knocked unconscious. You bled profusely on that bridge. Those marchers on that day got driven back. And that man on that couch in New Jersey saw what was happening and got up. And he didn't allow his inability to do everything to undermine his determination to do something. He couldn't afford a plane ticket. He couldn't close his business. But he was going to do the best he could with what he had, where he was. One American got up, started making phone calls, found a woman named Miss Lee Porter who was like, hallelujah, thank you, Lord. I need some help. He then went on a little bit of pro bono work. He started organizing other lawyers to do the same. And soon, one American to another, they had a great force of folks. And he told me 4 years later, he gets a case file with 2 names on it, Carrie and Carolyn Booker, my parents. Now think about this chain reaction. Think about the power that we all have. Most common way we give up power is not realizing we have it in the first place. Some marchers on a bridge on one day in 1965. They didn't even make their destination, but just by standing up in the name of love, in the name of patriotism, just by standing up for justice and righteousness, Even though they were driven back and beating, they unleashed an energy into the world, that patriotism that instantaneously jumped 1,000 miles and changed the heart of one man on a couch in New Jersey, who then got up off of that couch and gave a little bit of work every week that ultimately affected the destiny of a generation not yet born. I would not be running for President of the United States if it was not for that chain reaction of patriotic love. That is who we are. Americans with an interwoven destiny. Americans that can change the world by making a change in their locality, in their community. We don't curse the darkness in this country. We light candles. We are a nation that has shown that in the face of hatred and bigotry, we can bring love and healing. And this is that moral moment again in our country. We won't be called to do marches in front of state troopers willing to beat us. We won't be called to do some of the courageous things of our ancestors, whether Alice Paul and hunger strikes or people marching beaches. But this is our moment, and how will we define the character of our country? Because you cannot campaign wrong and think you're going to govern right. What will we do, and what will we say over these moments? Will we revive civic grace? Will we ignite a more courageous empathy? Will we stand for love? Because you cannot lead the people if you don't love the people. If we stand like that and work like that and come together and confront injustice like that, the injustice of poverty, lack of health care, lack of jobs with dignity, lack of retirement with dignity, if we confront those problems together, I promise you our tomorrows will be better than our yesterdays. I promise you that we indeed can make justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I promise you that we as a nation will rise. Thank you, everybody.